Sometimes the most dangerous secrets protect the ones we love. In Silver Creek, a dying boomtown, guards a forbidden ranch with tales of curses. When drifter Ethan Croft arrives searching for answers about his past, desperate townsfolk physically block his path to the abandoned Harrington Ranch. They swear anyone who enters vanishes. Driven by a name in his mother's diary, Ethan breaks through the chained doors. Inside, he finds pristine rooms, stocked pantries, and in a hidden cellar, 50 children, healthy and educated, living in secret. The town isn't hiding a curse. They're hiding their greatest shame. Silver Creek is bankrupt and starving. These children are their last hope. What would you sacrifice to save your children? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The sun hung low over the Colorado Territory as Ethan Croft guided his horse down the winding trail toward Silver Creek. Dust clung to his worn leather jacket, and his beard carried 3 weeks of travel from Wyoming. At 42 years old, he rode with the practiced ease of a man who had spent more nights under stars than roofs, his weathered hands steady on the reins, his grey eyes scanning the horizon with the careful attention of someone who had learned long ago that trouble usually announced itself in small ways first. The diary sat in his saddlebag, wrapped in oilcloth to protect it from the elements. His mother's diary. Catherine Croft had died 6 months earlier in a charity hospital in Cheyenne, and Ethan had been working a cattle drive in Montana when the letter finally caught up to him. By the time he arrived, she had been buried 2 weeks in a pauper's grave. The only possession the hospital had saved was the leather-bound diary, its pages yellowed and fragile, filled with his mother's careful handwriting. He had spent weeks reading it by campfire light, learning things about the woman who raised him that she had never spoken aloud. She had been born Catherine Harrington, daughter of a wealthy rancher in Colorado. She had run away at 18, pregnant and unmarried, choosing poverty and shame over the life her family had planned for her. She never told Ethan his father's name, but she had written it in the diary. James Harrington, her own cousin. The scandal of it had been unbearable to her family. They had sent her away with nothing, told the town she had died of fever, and forbidden her name from being spoken again. For 24 years, Catherine had survived doing laundry, taking in sewing, working as a cook in mining camps, always moving, always one step ahead of starvation, raising her son alone. She never complained. She never spoke of the past. She taught Ethan to read and write by lamplight in rented rooms, told him stories of honor and dignity, raised him to be better than the circumstances that created him. And now she was gone, and Ethan carried her diary like a responsibility. The last entry, written in a shaking hand just days before her death, said only, "I should have told him about the ranch, Silver Creek. He deserves to know where he comes from." Silver Creek appeared in the valley below, and Ethan pulled his horse to a stop on the ridge to study it. From a distance, it looked prosperous. The main street stretched through the center of town, lined with 2-story buildings painted in fresh colors. He could see a church steeple, a large mercantile, a hotel with a painted sign, and the skeletal framework of a new building under construction. Smoke rose from chimneys. Laundry hung on lines behind houses. It looked like a town that had found silver and knew how to spend the wealth wisely. But as Ethan rode closer, the illusion began to crack. The painted buildings were weathered underneath, the fresh color applied in patches to hide decay. The new building under construction sat abandoned, its lumber graying, weeds growing tall around the foundation. The streets were too empty for midday. No children played in the yards, no wagons rolled down the main road. The few people he saw moved with the slow, deliberate steps of those conserving energy. He tied his horse outside the mercantile and stepped through the door. The interior was dim, the shelves half empty. A man stood behind the counter, thin and hollow-cheeked, with the greyish complexion of someone who had not eaten properly in months. He looked up as Ethan entered, and something tightened in his expression, not quite fear, but close to it. "Help you?" the man asked. His voice was cautious. "Looking for information," Ethan said. He kept his tone easy, non-threatening. "I'm trying to find the old Harrington Ranch. My mother mentioned it before she passed." The storekeeper's face went pale. "Your mother?" "Catherine Croft, born Catherine Harrington." The man gripped the counter. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he turned and called toward the back room. "Mary! Mary, come out here!" A woman emerged, as thin as the storekeeper, her dress hanging loose on her frame. She looked at Ethan with the same wary expression. "What is it?" "Thomas? This man's asking about the Harrington place. Says his mother was Catherine Harrington." Mary's hand went to her mouth. "Catherine? But we thought she was dead." "She is dead," Ethan said quietly. 6 months now. But before she passed, she wrote about this town, about the ranch. I came to see it." Thomas and Mary exchanged a look that Ethan could not quite read. It was not grief or sympathy. It was something closer to panic. "You can't go there," Thomas said finally. "That place you need to turn around and ride back the way you came. Nothing good is out there." "I'm not asking for permission," Ethan said. "Just directions." "You're not hearing me." Thomas came around the counter, his hands raised in a placating gesture. "That ranch is cursed. Everyone knows it. Anyone who goes near it disappears. Just vanishes. We've lost 3 people in the last year who went looking for salvage or shelter. The land itself is poisoned." Ethan studied the man's face. Thomas believed what he was saying. Ethan could see that. But there was something underneath the fear, something rehearsed about the words. This was a story the town told, and told often. "I appreciate the warning," Ethan said, "but I'll make my own judgment." "Meter, partably, said bezer, partably to do side, donother decide, to do say, partably zer." Mary stepped forward. Please listen. There are things in this territory you don't understand. Old things. The Ute people wouldn't even hunt on that land. They said the spirits there were angry. After the Harringtons, after they all died, the place went dark. No one can explain it, but everyone who tries to prove it wrong ends up proving it right by never coming back. Ethan looked between them. These were not superstitious fools. They were frightened, genuinely frightened, and they wanted him to be frightened too. But fear alone would not turn him around. He had traveled too far, carried his mother's diary too many miles, to turn back now because of ghost stories. "I'm going to buy some supplies," he said, "and then I'm riding out to the ranch. If you want to help me, you can tell me where it is. If you don't, I'll find it myself." Thomas sagged against the counter. "Northwest, 5 miles. You'll see the gate, the chains across the doors." "Chains?" "We chained it shut," Mary said quietly. "After the last man disappeared. We thought, if we made it harder to get in, people would stop trying." Ethan nodded. "I'll need a crowbar then." "Don't do this," Thomas said. His voice cracked. "Whatever you're looking for out there, it's not worth your life." "I'm not planning to die today," Ethan said. He picked up a few cans of beans, some coffee, hardtack. The shelves were sparse, and the prices were doubled what they should have been. He paid with the last of his travel money and left the mercantile with Thomas and Mary watching him through the window, their faces drawn with something that looked like guilt. He rode northwest. The land rose gently, rolling hills covered in dry grass and scattered pine. In the distance, mountains cut sharp profiles against the sky. The air was clean and cool, carrying the scent of sage. It was beautiful country, the kind of place that should have made a town prosper. The gate appeared after an hour of riding. It was massive, built from timber and ironwork, standing at least 12 feet tall. The name Harrington was worked into the iron at the top. Beyond it, a long dirt road stretched toward a cluster of buildings in the distance, a main house, barns, outbuildings. Everything looked intact from here, not the burned ruins or collapsed structures he had expected. But the gate was chained, heavy chains wrapped through the bars and secured with multiple padlocks. Someone had painted words across the wood in red. "Keep out. Cursed land. Death awaits." Ethan dismounted and walked up to the gate. He touched the chains. They were new, the metal still bright. The paint was fresh. This had been done recently, maintained regularly. The town was not just warning strangers, they were actively working to keep people away. He walked the fence line, looking for a gap. The fence stretched in both directions, well built and well maintained, despite the town's apparent poverty. Someone was putting resources into keeping this place sealed. That alone told him there was something here worth protecting or worth hiding. He found a spot where the fence posts had weathered enough to climb. He left his horse tied to a tree with enough lead to graze and climbed over, dropping down on the other side. The moment his boots hit the ground inside the property, he felt the weight of the silence. No birds sang, no insects buzzed. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Ethan started walking up the long dirt road toward the house. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the grass. With each step, the buildings came into clearer focus. The main house was enormous, a 3-story Victorian structure with a wraparound porch and tall windows. The paint was faded but intact. The roof showed no obvious holes. For an abandoned property, it looked remarkably preserved. He was halfway to the house when he heard the sound of hoofbeats behind him. He turned to see 5 riders coming hard up the road from town, dust rising in their wake. They rode with purpose, with urgency. They had seen him cross the fence. Ethan stood his ground and waited. The riders pulled up 20 feet away, their horses snorting and stamping. 4 men and 1 woman, all of them thin, all of them carrying the same hollowed-out look he had seen on the storekeeper. But their eyes were hard now, determined. The woman rode forward. She was perhaps 50 years old, with steel-grey hair pulled back tight and a face carved by worry and sleepless nights. She sat her horse with authority. "You were warned," she said. Her voice carried the weight of command. "This land is not for you." "The land is not for anyone, apparently," Ethan replied. "But my mother was a Harrington. That makes it partly mine, doesn't it?" The woman's jaw tightened. "Catherine's son." "That's right. Catherine Harrington died 40 years ago. The town record says so." "The town record is a lie," Ethan said calmly. "And you know it. She died 6 months ago in Cheyenne, alone, poor, but she left me this." He pulled the diary from his jacket. "And she told me I deserved to know where I came from." The riders shifted in their saddles. One of the men, older with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest, spoke up. "Son, you need to understand something. That house, what's in there, it's not for outsiders to see. It's not safe. The stories you've heard are true. People who go in there don't come out." "Then how do you know what's in there?" Ethan asked. The silence that followed told him everything. They knew. They all knew. The curse was a story, and they were desperate to keep it alive. "I'm going inside," Ethan said. "You can try to stop me, but I don't think you will, because whatever's in that house, you're protecting it. And I don't think you're the type of people who hurt someone for trying to find answers about their own family." The woman with grey hair stared at him for a long time. Then she looked at the sheriff, and some unspoken communication passed between them. She turned back to Ethan, and her expression had changed. The hardness was still there, but underneath it now he could see exhaustion, desperation. "If you go in there," she said quietly, "everything changes. For you, for us, for this whole town. Are you prepared for that?" Ethan thought of his mother, dying alone. He thought of the diary, the secrets, the years of silence. "Yes," he said, "I am." The woman nodded slowly. Then she dismounted, and the others followed. They stood in a line between Ethan and the house, but they did not draw weapons. They simply waited, watching him as he walked past them toward the chained doors of the Harrington Ranch. The chains across the front doors were even heavier up close. 3 separate locks held them in place, and someone had wedged wooden planks across the doorframe for extra measure. Ethan pulled the crowbar from his belt, borrowed from his saddlebag, and worked the first plank free. The wood groaned and splintered. Behind him, he could hear the riders standing silent, watching. The second plank came easier, the third cracked down the middle. The chains hung loose now, and Ethan pulled them aside, letting them fall with a heavy clatter onto the porch boards. The sound echoed across the empty land like a bell tolling. He put his hand on the door handle. The metal was cold under his palm despite the afternoon sun. He turned it, felt the mechanism release, and pushed. The door swung open on well-oiled hinges. Ethan stepped inside, and the world shifted. He had expected darkness. He had expected decay, rotting furniture, collapsed ceilings, animal nests, the accumulated destruction of abandonment. Instead, he found a grand foyer bathed in soft light from tall windows. The floor was polished hardwood, gleaming and clean. A chandelier hung from the ceiling, its crystals dust-free and catching the light. A staircase curved upward to the second floor, its banister smooth and intact. Fresh flowers, actual fresh flowers, sat in a vase on a side table. Ethan stood frozen in the doorway. The air inside smelled of beeswax and lavender. Not mold, not rot, not the stale emptiness of a house left to die. He heard footsteps behind him and turned to see the grey-haired woman standing at the threshold. She did not enter. She simply watched his face, reading his confusion. "You're beginning to understand," she said quietly. "This house isn't abandoned," Ethan said. "No, it's not. Who maintains it? We do. The town, all of us." Ethan walked deeper into the foyer, his boots echoing on the clean floor. He touched the wall, smooth plaster, recently painted. He looked into the parlor to his left and saw furniture arranged with care, cushions plumped, surfaces dusted. A book lay open on a reading table, as if someone had just set it down to stretch their legs. "I don't understand," he said. The woman finally stepped inside. The other riders remained on the porch, framed in the doorway like sentinels. She moved with the familiarity of someone who had walked these rooms many times before. "My name is Margaret Walsh," she said. "I was the schoolteacher in Silver Creek for 20 years. Before that, I worked in this house. The Harringtons hired me as a governess when I was 22 years old. When did they die? 10 years ago. Jonathan Harrington, your grandfather, was the last. He left instructions, very specific instructions, and money. Enough money to keep this house maintained, to keep it sealed, to keep the town quiet about what's here." "What is here?" Ethan asked. Margaret looked at him for a long moment. Then she walked to a side door that Ethan had not noticed, partially hidden behind a tall bookshelf. She opened it, revealing a descending staircase cut into stone. "The cellar," she said. "That's where you'll find your answer." Ethan approached the doorway. The stairs led down into darkness, but even from here he could see lamplight flickering below, could hear the faint sound of something. Voices, movement. "There are people down there," he said. "Yes. The people who disappeared." Margaret shook her head. "No one has disappeared. That's the story we tell. But the truth," her voice caught, "the truth is much harder to explain." Ethan descended the first step, then the second. The stone walls were cool and dry, well constructed. The lamplight grew brighter as he went deeper. He could hear the voices more clearly now, young voices, multiple voices, speaking in unison. 7 times 8 is 56. 7 times 9 is 63. 7 times 10 is 70. Children's voices, reciting multiplication tables. Ethan reached the bottom of the stairs and stepped into a vast cellar that had been transformed into something impossible. The space stretched the entire length of the house, supported by thick timber columns. Lamps hung from the ceiling, casting warm light across. Across rows of children, 50 of them, perhaps more, sitting at desks arranged in neat lines. They ranged in age from perhaps 5 to 14 years old. They wore simple but clean clothes. Their faces were healthy, their eyes bright. A young woman stood at the front of the room beside a chalkboard, leading them through their lessons. She froze when she saw Ethan, her piece of chalk suspended in mid-air. The children turned to look at him, 50 pairs of eyes, curious and unafraid. Ethan could not speak, could not think. He simply stood there, trying to reconcile what he was seeing with anything that made sense. Margaret appeared beside him. "This is Silver Creek's secret," she said softly. "This is what we've been hiding. Why are they here? Why are they hidden?" One of the children, a girl of perhaps 10 years old with auburn hair in braids, raised her hand. The young teacher nodded, and the girl spoke. "Because the town is dying, sir, and we're the only future it has left." Margaret gestured for Ethan to follow her to a side room, leaving the children to continue their lesson. The side room was smaller, set up as a combination library and dining area. Shelves lined the walls, packed with books. A long table sat in the center, and through an open doorway, Ethan could see a kitchen with a massive iron stove. "2 years ago," Margaret began, "the silver ran out, not slowly, not with warning. The main vein simply ended, deeper than we could dig, richer than we had dreamed, but finite. The mining companies pulled out within months. Silver Creek went from boomtown to ghost town in the space of a season." She sat down heavily at the table. Ethan remained standing, his mind still reeling. "We thought we could adapt," she continued. "Thought we could farm, raise cattle, find another way. But the water rights were all tied to the mining operations. The railroad rerouted. Supplies stopped coming because we couldn't pay. By the end of the first year, half the town had left. The ones who stayed, we stayed because this was our home. Our children were born here, but we were starving." "And this house?" Ethan asked. Jonathan Harrington had prepared for this. He had seen it coming, somehow. Before he died, he converted his entire fortune, everything he had earned from the silver, into supplies. Food, medicine, books, tools, everything a community would need to survive. He stored it all here, in this cellar. He left instructions with the town council. When the crisis came, we were to bring the children here. All of them. We were to hide them, feed them, educate them, keep them safe while the adults worked to save the town. "But why the secret?" Ethan demanded. "Why the curse stories? Why chain the doors?" Margaret's face hardened. "Because there are men out there who would take what we have. Bandits, outlaws, desperate people from other dying towns. If word got out that Silver Creek was defenseless, that we had pooled every resource we had into one location to save our children, we would be raided within a week. The children would be taken, sold, maybe, used as leverage. The food would be stolen. Everything Jonathan Harrington built would be destroyed." Ethan sank into a chair across from her. "So you tell everyone the place is cursed. You make people afraid to come near." "We tell people that anyone who enters disappears," Margaret said. "And in a way, it's true. The 3 men who disappeared last year, they were scouts for a gang operating out of New Mexico. They came looking for salvage. We caught them, held them here for 2 days while we decided what to do, then escorted them to the territorial border and told them that if they ever came back, we would make sure they actually did disappear." Word spread. The curse story grew teeth. "And the children? Don't they have families?" "Of course they do. Their families see them every Sunday. We have a system. The parents come before dawn, spend the day, leave after dark. We tell any strangers who might pass through that the children are at a boarding school in Denver, that we're sending them away to give them better opportunities. It's not a lie, exactly. We are trying to give them better opportunities. We're trying to give them a future." Ethan looked through the doorway at the classroom. The children were writing now, bent over their papers with concentration. The young teacher moved between the desks, offering quiet corrections and encouragement. "How long can you keep this up?" he asked. Margaret's shoulders sagged. "We don't know. The supplies will last another year, maybe 2 if we're careful. We've been sending the older men out to neighboring territories to find work. They send money back when they can. We're trying to establish trade routes, find new markets for the few things we can produce. But it's slow, and every month more families leave. Every month we lose people who could help rebuild. And now "I've found your secret." She met his eyes. "Yes, now you have. The question is, what will you do with it?" Ethan thought of his mother, working herself to death in obscurity. He thought of the diary, the final message about deserving to know where he came from. He thought of these children, healthy and bright-eyed, hidden underground, while their town slowly died around them. "I don't know yet," he said honestly. "But I'm not going to be the one who destroys what you've built here." Margaret exhaled slowly, and some of the tension left her frame. "Then maybe you're more Harrington than we feared." From the classroom, a bell rang, a small handbell that signaled the end of the lesson. The children stood, pushing back their chairs with practiced quietness. They lined up to wash their hands at a basin in the corner, then filed toward the dining area. They looked at Ethan with open curiosity but no fear. "Are you staying for supper, sir?" Ethan looked at Margaret, who nodded slightly. "Yes," he said, "I suppose I am." And as the children began setting the table with the easy teamwork of those who had done this many times before, Ethan realized that he had not just discovered Silver Creek's secret, he had become part of it. Supper in the cellar was a quiet affair, organized with military precision. The children ate at the long table in shifts, the younger ones first, while the older children helped serve. The food was simple: beans, cornbread, preserved vegetables from last year's harvest, but there was enough. No one went hungry. That alone was remarkable, given what Ethan now knew about Silver Creek's situation. He sat with Margaret and the young teacher, whose name was Sarah Kemper. She was 24 years old, the daughter of the town's former doctor, and she had been teaching the children for 18 months. Most of them had no formal schooling before this, Sarah explained as they ate. The town was too busy with silver. Parents worked the mines or the mills. Education seemed like something that could wait. Now, it's all they have time for. "They're bright," Ethan observed. He had watched them during the lesson, attentive, eager, competitive in solving problems. "They're motivated," Margaret corrected. "They know their parents are working themselves to exhaustion to keep this place running. They know that learning everything they can is the best way to honor that sacrifice. Besides, there's not much else to do down here." Ethan glanced around the cellar. It was well lit and clean, but it was still underground, still sealed off from the world. "How do they manage, being locked up like this?" "They're not locked up," Sarah said, a bit defensively. "They go outside every day. Early morning, before sunrise, they exercise in the courtyard behind the house. We have lessons in the gardens when weather permits. They're not prisoners. But they can't leave the property." "No," Margaret admitted. "That part is necessary. If someone saw them, if a stranger came through, the whole deception would fall apart." After the children had finished eating and cleaned up their dishes, they scattered to various corners of the cellar. Some settled into reading nooks with books, others gathered around a table to play chess. A group of the youngest children sat in a circle while one of the older girls read to them from a worn copy of Treasure Island. It was remarkably peaceful, remarkably normal, given the circumstances. Sheriff Daniel Perkins arrived near dusk, climbing down the cellar stairs with the heavy tread of a man who had not slept well in months. He was in his 60s, with a white beard and deep lines around his eyes. He looked at Ethan with assessment, not hostility. "So you're the son," Perkins said. "You have your mother's eyes. You knew her?" "Before she left. I was just a deputy then, barely 20 years old. Catherine was—" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "She was kind to everyone. When the Harringtons cast her out, half the town thought it was cruel. But Jonathan Harrington was not a man who tolerated defiance." They moved to a small office that had been carved out of one corner of the cellar. It held a desk, a few chairs, and shelves lined with ledgers and documents. Margaret pulled down a thick leather-bound book and set it on the desk. "This is the accounting," she said. "Everything we've spent, everything we have left." Jonathan Harrington left instructions that the heir to the ranch, if one ever came forward, should have full access to the records. Ethan opened the ledger. The entries were meticulous, written in different hands over the past 2 years. Food purchases, medicine, lamp oil, clothing, books, repairs to the house, wages for the teachers and caretakers. Every penny accounted for, every expense justified. He turned to the summary page at the back. The remaining balance made his breath catch. $2,300. It sounded like a fortune. In reality, for 50 children and the infrastructure to support them, it was almost nothing. How long? He asked. 10 months, Margaret said. Maybe a year, if we cut rations. But we can't cut rations. The children are growing. They need food. What about the parents? Can't they contribute? Sheriff Perkins laughed bitterly. With what? Most of them are working for food, not wages. We've got miners digging wells for neighboring ranches in exchange for beef. We've got women taking in laundry from towns 50 miles away, getting paid in flour and sugar. There's no money anymore, son. There's just survival. Ethan flipped through more pages. The efficiency was impressive. Nothing wasted. Everything stretched to its maximum value. But even perfect efficiency could not create resources that did not exist. The town council meets tomorrow, Margaret said. You should come. You're a Harrington. You have a right to be there. And, she hesitated, we need new ideas. We've been running on hope and prayer for 2 years. It's running out. That night, Ethan slept in one of the second-floor bedrooms of the main house. The room had been prepared for him, bed made with clean sheets, lamp filled with oil, water in a pitcher on the dresser. Someone had even placed a vase of wildflowers on the nightstand. The attention to detail reminded him of his mother, the way she could make a rented room feel like home with just a few thoughtful touches. He lay awake for hours, listening to the house settle around him. Somewhere below, 50 children slept in a dormitory that had been carved out of the cellar's north end. Above him, the empty rooms of his grandfather's mansion stretched silent and dark. This whole elaborate structure, the secret, the curse stories, the careful logistics, it was all built on borrowed time and borrowed money. In the morning, he woke to the sound of children's voices outside. He dressed quickly and went to the window. In the courtyard behind the house, the children were exercising, running laps around the perimeter, doing calisthenics, playing organized games under the supervision of 2 older men Ethan did not recognize. The children were energetic, laughing, competitive. They looked like any group of children anywhere, except for the careful way they stayed within the walls, never straying toward the open gates. Margaret appeared in the doorway. The council meets at noon in town. I'll ride back with you. They left the ranch together, joining Sheriff Perkins and 2 of the other men from yesterday's riding party. As they rode back toward Silver Creek, Ethan studied the land with new eyes. This had been his grandfather's empire, tens of thousands of acres, built on silver and maintained by shrewd investment. Now it was a refuge for desperate people clinging to hope. The town looked even worse in morning light. The main street was mostly deserted. The few people he saw moved with the slow deliberation of those conserving energy. A woman sat on a porch, mending clothes that had already been mended multiple times. An old man worked a small garden behind a boarded-up shop, coaxing vegetables from thin soil. The council meeting was held in what had once been the assayer's office. 6 people sat around a table, 3 men, 3 women, all of them carrying the same worn, worried look. They watched Ethan enter with expressions ranging from hope to suspicion. Margaret made introductions. This is Ethan Croft, Catherine Harrington's son, Jonathan's grandson. He knows about the ranch. He knows about the children. A man named Robert Cross, who ran the defunct mining operations administrative office, leaned forward. And what does he plan to do with that knowledge? I plan to help, Ethan said, if you'll let me. Help how? Asked a woman named Claire Dennison, who operated the boarding house. We've been trying to help ourselves for 2 years. We've sent men to other territories looking for work. We've tried to establish trade. We've done everything we can think of. What can one drifter do that we haven't already tried? It was a fair question. Ethan had no special skills, no hidden fortune, no magical solution. He was just a man with a horse and a diary and a newfound connection to a dying town. But he thought of those children, reciting their multiplication tables by lamplight. He thought of his mother, working herself to death in obscurity. He thought of second chances and the obligations that came with family names. "I don't know yet," he admitted, "but I'm a Harrington, and according to my grandfather's will, that makes this partially my responsibility. So I'm not leaving until we figure something out." The council members exchanged glances. Sheriff Perkins nodded slowly. "All right then, let's talk about what we need." And as the meeting began in earnest, Ethan realized he had just committed himself to something far larger than finding answers about his past. He had committed himself to saving Silver Creek's future. The town's needs were staggering. As the council talked, Ethan filled pages in a borrowed notebook with problems that seemed to have no solutions. The town needed money for supplies. They needed buyers for the few goods they could produce. They needed water rights to expand farming. They needed connections to markets 300 miles away. They needed time, and time was the one resource they could not manufacture. After the meeting, Claire Dennison invited Ethan to dinner at the boarding house. It was not an act of hospitality so much as a challenge. She wanted to show him what the adults were living with, while the children ate well in the cellar. The boarding house dining room held 8 people, all that remained of what had once been a bustling establishment serving miners and merchants. The meal was thin soup and hard bread. No one complained. They ate slowly, making it last, speaking in low voices about the day's work. "I hauled water today," said a man named Henry Watts. He was in his 40s, his hands calloused and scarred from years in the mines. 6 miles from the creek to the Patterson place. They paid me in potatoes, 12 potatoes for a full day's work. "That's fair," said another man. "Potatoes keep. Money doesn't." Ethan ate his soup and said nothing. These people were not complaining. They were simply stating facts, sharing information about survival. There was no self-pity in their voices, only exhaustion. After dinner, Claire led him to her small private office behind the kitchen. She pulled out a wooden box and opened it, revealing dozens of photographs. Tintype portraits mostly, the kind that cost a week's wages back when Silver Creek had wages. "These are the families," she said, spreading the photographs on the desk. "I want you to see their faces. I want you to understand what we're fighting for." She picked up one photograph, a family of 4 standing in front of a small house. A man, a woman, 2 young boys. "This is the Carter family. Thomas Carter worked the number 3 shaft for 12 years. His wife Emma ran the bakery. Those boys are 8 and 10 now. They're in the cellar, learning mathematics and geography, while their parents work themselves to death trying to keep this town alive." Another photograph. A woman holding a baby, Sarah Mitchell. She lost her husband in a mine collapse 4 years ago. That baby is 6 years old now, one of the youngest in the cellar. Sarah works at the mercantile, taking payment in goods instead of cash, stretching every penny to contribute her share to the children's fund. Photo after photo, face after face, stories of loss and determination of people who had come west looking for opportunity and found instead a test of their endurance. "The children don't know how bad it is," Claire said quietly. "We've kept that from them. They know the town is struggling, but they don't know that half their parents go to bed hungry so the supplies last longer. They don't know that people are wearing shoes with holes in them because we can't afford to replace them. They don't know that we're holding on by our fingernails." "Why tell me this?" Ethan asked. "Because you're a Harrington. Your grandfather created this system and it's kept those children alive. But Jonathan Harrington is dead, and you're here now. You have choices to make. You could sell the ranch, take your inheritance, leave us to collapse. Or," she paused, "or you could stay and help us figure out how to survive this." Ethan looked at the photographs spread across the desk. 50 families, 50 different stories of hope and desperation. What would Jonathan have done? "I don't know," Claire admitted. "He was a hard man, brilliant with money but cold. He cast out his own daughter without a second thought. But at the end, when he knew the silver was running out, he spent everything he had to protect these children. Maybe he was trying to atone, or maybe he finally understood what really mattered. That night, Ethan returned to the ranch and spent hours walking through the house. It was strange to think of this place as his inheritance. He had grown up in rented rooms and mining camps. He had never owned more than what fit in a saddlebag. Now he was supposedly heir to this mansion, these thousands of acres, this elaborate secret. He found his grandfather's study on the second floor. The room was preserved exactly as Jonathan Harrington had left it: massive desk, leather chair, walls lined with books and mining charts. A portrait hung above the fireplace. Jonathan Harrington at 60, stern-faced and commanding, painted in oils that captured his cold determination. Ethan studied his grandfather's face and saw nothing of his mother in it. Catherine had been warm, gentle, quick to laugh despite her hardships. This man looked incapable of gentleness. In the desk drawers, he found more documents, letters from banks, investment records, carefully drafted instructions for the trust that maintained the ranch. Everything precise, everything calculated. But in the bottom drawer, wrapped in cloth, he found something different. A letter addressed to Catherine. It had never been sent. The ink had faded, but the words were still legible. Ethan sat in his grandfather's chair and read by lamplight. "Catherine, I was wrong. I told myself I was protecting the family name, but I was only protecting my pride. You chose love over duty, and I punished you for it. I sent away my own daughter because I could not bear the shame. But shame is a poor trade for family. By the time I realized this, you were gone. I searched for years. I hired investigators. I spent fortunes trying to find you and bring you home. But you had disappeared too well, or perhaps you simply had no wish to be found. I do not blame you. I pray you have found happiness. I pray you have forgiven me, even though I do not deserve it. If your child ever finds this place, if they ever come looking for their family, I hope they will understand that I tried, at the end, to do something right. The ranch is theirs. Everything I built is theirs. Tell them I am sorry." The letter was unsigned, but dated 3 months before Jonathan Harrington's death. Ethan read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back in the drawer. His grandfather had been looking for them. All those years, while Catherine worked herself to exhaustion in obscurity, Jonathan had been trying to find her. The reconciliation had never happened. The apology had never been delivered. His mother had died, never knowing that she had been forgiven. Ethan sat in the dark study for a long time, thinking about missed chances and the weight of family legacies. His grandfather had built an empire on silver and then used it to try to save the next generation. It was not enough to make up for casting out his daughter, but it was something. It was an attempt at redemption. The question now was what Ethan would do with that inheritance. He could walk away. He could sell the ranch to the highest bidder, take the money, and disappear back into the life of a drifter. No one would blame him. He owed these people nothing. But those children were learning multiplication by lamplight. Those parents were eating potatoes and thin soup while their children ate well. This town was dying by inches, and the only thing keeping them going was hope that someone would find a way to save them. Ethan thought of his mother's last words in the diary. He deserves to know where he comes from. He came from this, from silver wealth and family exile, from hard men trying to make amends, from desperate communities holding together by force of will, from people who put children's futures ahead of their own comfort. Maybe that was heritage enough. In the morning, he would start looking for solutions. He would ride to neighboring towns, talk to merchants, explore markets, search for opportunities that the isolated people of Silver Creek might have missed. He would use his outsider's perspective, his freedom of movement, his lack of attachment to this place to find angles they could not see. He would try. That was all anyone could do. Try, and hope it was enough. Below him, in the cellar, 50 children slept peacefully, unaware that their entire future rested on borrowed time and borrowed money. unaware that a stranger with their blood in his veins was sitting in the dark, trying to figure out how to save them. For 3 weeks, Ethan rode a circuit through the surrounding territories. He visited towns that were thriving, towns that were struggling, and towns that had already died and been abandoned to the wind. He talked to merchants and ranchers and railroad men. He asked questions and listened carefully to the answers. What he learned was not encouraging. The region was saturated with towns like Silver Creek, places that had boomed on mining wealth and then collapsed when the veins ran dry. Everyone was competing for the same limited resources, the same scarce markets. The few success stories he found had one thing in common. They had something unique to sell, something no one else could provide. Silver Creek had nothing unique. They had failed mines, exhausted resources, and no particular expertise beyond what dozens of other towns possessed. Their only asset was the children, and they could not exactly advertise that. Ethan returned to the ranch on a cold afternoon in late October to find Margaret waiting for him on the porch. Her expression told him something had happened. "We have a problem," she said without preamble. "A territorial marshal came through yesterday. He's asking questions about the Harrington Ranch. Someone told him the curse stories, and now he's suspicious. He wants to inspect the property." "When?" "3 days from now. He's thorough, Ethan. If he searches the house, he'll find 50 children living in a cellar," Ethan finished. "And then what? What law are we breaking?" "No specific law," Margaret admitted. "But questions will be asked, federal attention will be drawn, and if word gets out that Silver Creek has resources worth protecting, we'll have every desperate gang between here and Texas showing up to take what we have." They called an emergency meeting of the town council that night. The mood was grim. "We could move the children," suggested Robert Cross. "Hide them in the old mine shafts, temporarily." "For how long?" Claire Dennison demanded. "The marshal could decide to stay a week. The mines are dangerous, unstable, and it's getting cold. We'd be risking their health." "We could tell the marshal the truth," Sheriff Perkins said. "Explain the situation, appeal to his better nature." "And if he has no better nature," Margaret countered, "if he's the type who sees opportunity in our desperation, we've kept this secret for 2 years. We can't afford to trust the wrong person now." Ethan had been studying a map he had acquired on his travels, a detailed territorial map showing roads, towns, railroad lines, and geographic features. He had marked it up with notes about resources and opportunities. Now he spread it on the table. "There might be another way," he said, "but it's risky." Everyone leaned forward to look. "I've been mapping trade routes," Ethan explained, "looking for gaps in the market. There's one interesting pattern. See here," he pointed to a railroad junction, 200 miles east. "This junction connects 3 major lines, but there's no dedicated freight operation serving the ranches in this corridor. They're all hauling their own goods to market, wasting time and money on individual trips." "How does that help us?" Claire asked. "What if Silver Creek became a freight hub? We have wagons, we have people willing to work. We could offer to consolidate shipments from multiple ranches, haul them to the junction efficiently, and take a cut of the savings. It's not glamorous, but it's reliable income." Robert Cross studied the map. "The distances are significant. We'd need fresh horses, way stations, reliable drivers, and we'd need capital to start wagons, equipment, contracts with the ranchers." "We use the ranch," Ethan said. "Not the money, the ranch itself. We put it up as collateral for a loan. We use that capital to start the freight operation. If it succeeds, we pay back the loan and have a sustainable business. If it fails," he paused, "if it fails, we lose the ranch, but we're losing it anyway, just slower." The silence that followed was heavy. "That's our safety net," Margaret said quietly. "If we lose the ranch, we lose the children's refuge, we lose the supplies, we lose everything." "We're losing everything already," Ethan said, "just on a slower timeline. This way, we at least have a chance." "And what about the marshal?" Sheriff Perkins asked. That problem doesn't solve itself. We use him, Ethan said. We ask him to invest. The room erupted in protests. Ethan raised his hand for quiet. Think about it. A territorial marshal has connections. He knows people with money. If we can convince him that Silver Creek is starting a legitimate freight business, if we can show him the opportunity, he might become our advocate instead of our problem. He won't care about ghost stories if he thinks there's profit to be made. And if he says no? Claire demanded. Then we're in the same position we're in now, but at least we tried. The council debated for hours. The risks were enormous. Putting the ranch up as collateral meant gambling with the only security they had. Bringing an outsider into their confidence meant trusting someone they did not know. Failure meant immediate collapse instead of slow decline. But Margaret finally spoke the truth everyone was thinking. We can't keep going like this. The money will run out in 10 months. The children will be fine. But then what? We send them back to a dead town? We've been postponing the inevitable. Maybe it's time to take a real chance. The vote was close, 4 in favor, 2 against. They would approach the marshal with the freight business proposal. They would ask for his investment and his connections. And they would pray that Ethan had read the situation correctly. Marshal William Thatcher arrived 3 days later, riding a black horse and wearing a badge that caught the morning sun. He was in his 50s, barrel-chested, with a grey moustache and the careful eyes of a man who had seen every kind of deception. He met the town council in the assayer's office and listened to their pitch with an expression that gave nothing away. Ethan spread the map on the table and walked him through the plan. Routes, distances, potential clients, projected costs, expected revenues. He had spent 3 days refining the numbers, making sure everything added up, anticipating questions. Thatcher studied the map for a long time. Then he looked at each person around the table, assessing them. Finally, his gaze settled on Ethan. "You're a Harrington," he said. It was not a question. "Yes. And you're willing to risk your inheritance on this?" "I'm willing to risk it on these people," Ethan corrected. Thatcher nodded slowly. "I've heard the stories about this ranch. Curses, disappearances, ghost tales. I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in secrets. You folks are hiding something out here." The room went very still. Ethan met the marshal's eyes and made a decision. Sometimes honesty was the only strategy left. "Yes," he said, "we are. And if you want to see it, if you want to know what we're really protecting, I'll show you. But first, I need your word that what you see stays confidential until you've made your decision about the investment." Thatcher's eyebrows rose. "That's a bold negotiation." "It's not a negotiation. It's trust. We're asking you to trust that what we're doing is worth protecting, and we're offering to trust you with our secret." "That's the deal." The marshal thought for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. "All right. Show me." And as they rode out toward the Harrington Ranch, Ethan hoped desperately that he had not just made the worst mistake of his life. Marshal Thatcher stood at the top of the cellar stairs, looking down at 50 children eating lunch in organized quiet, and said nothing for a full minute. Ethan stood beside him, watching the marshal's face for any sign of what he was thinking. Margaret waited at the bottom of the stairs, her hands clasped tightly in front of her. Finally, Thatcher descended. The children looked up at him with mild curiosity, but they did not stop eating. They had learned to accept the occasional adult visitor without disruption. Discipline and routine had become their armor against uncertainty. Sarah Kemper approached the marshal with the confidence of someone protecting her charges. "Welcome, Marshal. I'm Sarah, the primary teacher. Would you like to observe the afternoon lessons?" "Yes," Thatcher said. His voice was rough. "I would." They spent 2 hours in the cellar. Thatcher watched mathematics lessons. He listened to history recitations. He examined the dormitory, the kitchen, the carefully organized storage rooms. He asked questions about supplies, about health, about the logistics of moving 50 children in and out for family visits without being seen. Margaret answered every question honestly. There was no point in half-truths now. When the formal tour was complete, one of the youngest children, a girl named Emma, perhaps 6 years old, approached the marshal with something clutched in her small hands. She held it out to him shyly. "I made this for you," she said. It was a drawing, done in careful pencil on a piece of precious paper. It showed a house with smoke rising from the chimney, surrounded by children holding hands in a circle. At the top, in laboured letters, she had written, "Thank you for helping us." Thatcher took the drawing with hands that trembled slightly. He looked at the little girl, at her hopeful face, and something in his expression cracked. "Why are you thanking me?" he asked gently. "I haven't done anything yet." "Miss Margaret said you're here to help the town," Emma said. "That means you're helping us. We're the town's children." The marshal folded the drawing carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. "Yes," he said, "I suppose you are." They climbed back up to the main house. Thatcher walked to the parlour window and stood looking out at the empty land for a long time. Ethan and Margaret gave him space, waiting for judgment. "How long has this been going on?" Thatcher asked finally. 22 months, Margaret said, "since the silver money ran out and we realized the town was dying. And no one outside Silver Creek knows. We've told the curse stories. We've scared off everyone who came too close. We've lied to neighboring towns about sending the children to boarding school in Denver. We've done whatever we had to do to keep them safe and hidden." Thatcher turned from the window. "What you're doing, it's not illegal, unconventional, maybe desperate, but not criminal. You're pooling resources to care for children while their parents work to save a dying economy. That's community survival, not conspiracy." "But if word gets out," Ethan began. "If word gets out, you'll have problems," Thatcher agreed. "But not legal problems. The problem will be predators. Men who see 50 healthy children and a stocked cellar and decide to take what you have. That's what you're really afraid of, isn't it? Not the law, not federal attention. Just the simple fact that desperate times make desperate men." "Yes," Margaret said quietly. The marshal sat down heavily in one of the parlour chairs. "I have 3 children of my own, grown now, living in Santa Fe. But I remember what it was like to worry about feeding them, about giving them futures. What you people are doing, it's extraordinary. Foolish, maybe. Dangerous, certainly. But extraordinary." "Will you help us?" Ethan asked. Thatcher pulled Emma's drawing from his pocket and looked at it again. "Your freight operation plan, it's sound. I know ranchers in that corridor who would pay for reliable consolidation. I know investors who would fund a startup if the terms were right. But you need to understand something. Business like this draws attention. People will come to Silver Creek asking questions. You can't hide 50 children forever." "We don't need forever," Margaret said. "Just long enough for the town to stabilize. Once we have income, once families can feed themselves again, the children can come home. This was always meant to be temporary. We ran out of time before we ran out of problems. How much capital do you need to start?" Ethan pulled out his calculations. $3,000, 2 wagons, 4 teams of horses, equipment, initial operating costs, and enough reserve to handle the first 3 months of payroll. After that, the business should be self-sustaining. Thatcher studied the numbers. "And you're putting up the ranch as collateral?" "I am," Ethan confirmed. "Full ownership transfer if we default on the loan. That's a hell of a risk for a man who just found out he had an inheritance 3 weeks ago." Ethan thought of his mother, dying alone in a charity hospital. He thought of Jonathan Harrington's unsent letter. He thought of Emma's drawing, thanking him for help he had not yet given. "Some risks are worth taking," he said. The marshal stood and extended his hand. "I'll do it. I'll invest $1,000 of my own money, and I'll convince 2 associates to match it. We'll form a partnership. Silver Creek, freight and transport. You run the operations. We provide the capital and the connections. Profits split 4 ways. Ethan shook his hand, relief flooding through him. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet," Thatcher said. "This is business, not charity. If you fail, I take the ranch and liquidate it to recover my investment. If you succeed, we all profit. Those are the terms." "Understood. And there's one more condition." Thatcher's expression hardened. "Eventually the children will have to be revealed. Not now, not until the town is stable. But you can't keep this secret forever. When the time comes, you'll need a story that protects everyone involved. Start thinking about that now." After the marshal left, Margaret sank onto the porch steps, her face in her hands. Ethan sat beside her. "We did it," she said. "We actually did it." "We did the easy part," Ethan corrected. "Now we have to make the business work." "You're very calm about this." "I'm terrified," Ethan admitted. "But terrified and active is better than terrified and passive. At least now we're trying." Over the next 2 weeks, everything moved quickly. Thatcher brought his associates a rancher named Douglas Warren and a railroad contractor named Samuel Hayes. They reviewed the business plan, inspected the ranch, and signed contracts that made Ethan's hands shake. $3,000 changed hands. 2 sturdy freight wagons were purchased. Horses were acquired and trained. The first contracts with ranchers were negotiated and signed. Silver Creek came alive with purpose. Men who had been scraping by on day labor now had steady work as drivers and loaders. The town's blacksmith had orders for wagon repairs and maintenance. The mercantile began stocking supplies for the freight operation. Money, actual money, started flowing again. The children in the cellar sensed the change. Their parents visited with less exhaustion in their faces, more hope in their voices. The weekly rations improved slightly. The fear that had hung over everything like smoke began, slowly, to lift. But Ethan could not shake the feeling that something was about to go wrong. The plan was working too well. The pieces were falling into place too easily. He had learned, in his years of drifting, it usually charged interest. He just did not know yet what that interest would be. Late one night, as he reviewed the freight schedules in his grandfather's study, he heard horses approaching the ranch. Multiple horses, riding fast. He went to the window and saw 5 riders coming up the road, visible in the moonlight. They were not from Silver Creek. Ethan grabbed his rifle and went downstairs. By the time he reached the porch, the riders had pulled up in front of the house. They did not dismount. They simply sat their horses, studying the property with the practiced assessment of men who evaluated targets for a living. The leader was a man in his 30s, with cold eyes and a scar running from his ear to his jaw. He looked at Ethan and smiled without warmth. "Heard you folks got a freight operation starting up," he said. "Thought we'd come by and offer our services." "What kind of services?" Ethan asked, though he already knew. "Protection," the man said. "Territory like this, you need protection. Lots of accidents can happen to freight wagons, lost cargo, broken axles, drivers who don't show up for work. We make sure none of that happens. For a reasonable fee, of course." Ethan tightened his grip on the rifle. "We're not interested." The man's smile widened. "I think you'll change your mind. See, we've been watching this town. We know you're hiding something valuable. Don't know what it is yet, but we'll find out. And when we do—" He paused. "Well, let's just say it would be better for everyone if we were friends." He turned his horse and rode away, his men following. They disappeared into the darkness, leaving Ethan standing alone on the porch. The interest had just come due. The emergency council meeting convened before dawn. Ethan described the riders, their threat, the cold calculation in the leader's eyes. Sheriff Perkins recognized the description immediately. "Cole Brennan," Perkins said grimly. "He runs a gang out of the Badlands. 20 men, maybe more. They've been hitting freight operations across 3 territories. Protection rackets mostly, but they're not above straight robbery when the opportunity presents itself." "How did they hear about our operation so fast?" Robert Cross demanded. "We've barely been running 2 weeks." "Word travels," Marshal Thatcher said. He had ridden in at first light when he heard about the threat. A dying town suddenly starts a freight business. People notice, people talk, and people like Brennan pay attention to changes in the landscape. "We can't pay protection money," Margaret said. "We're barely covering operating costs as it is. If we start paying Brennan, there won't be any profit. The business will fail before it starts." "Then we refuse," Claire said. "We arm ourselves. We defend the wagons." "Against 20 men?" Sheriff Perkins shook his head. "We're farmers and miners, not gunfighters. We'd lose." Ethan had been quiet, thinking. Now he spoke. "There's something else. Brennan said they know we're hiding something valuable. They don't know about the children, but they suspect something, which means someone has been watching us. Someone has been reporting back." The implication settled over the room like frost. A spy, someone in Silver Creek or close enough to observe, was feeding information to Brennan's gang. "We need to move the children," Margaret said. "Today, before Brennan decides to search the ranch." "Move them where?" Ethan asked. "The mines are dangerous. Spreading them across townhouses defeats the entire purpose of consolidating resources, and if we move them, Brennan will notice the activity and investigate." They argued in circles, each solution creating new problems. Time was running out, and everyone knew it. In the afternoon, Ethan returned to the ranch alone to think. He walked through his grandfather's study, looking for answers in the carefully organized records. Jonathan Harrington had been meticulous, every investment documented, every property deed filed, every contract preserved. But as Ethan searched through the files, something bothered him. The numbers did not quite add up. The trust that maintained the ranch should have had more money in it. The expenses over the past 2 years were precisely documented, but the starting balance seemed lower than it should have been given Jonathan's wealth. Either his grandfather had been less rich than the town believed, or money had been moved somewhere else. Ethan pulled out every financial document he could find. He spread them across the desk and began cross-referencing bank statements, investment records, property deeds, purchase receipts. He worked through dinner, lighting lamps as darkness fell, following the paper trail of his grandfather's fortune. And then he found it. A deed filed 6 months before Jonathan Harrington died, transferring ownership of a parcel of land to a holding company with an address in Denver. The land was described as Section 12, Northwestern Quarter, adjacent to Harrington Ranch proper. Ethan pulled out the property maps and located Section 12. It was 300 acres of seemingly worthless rocky hillside at the edge of the ranch boundaries. The transfer price was listed as $1. Why would Jonathan sell 300 acres for $1? Ethan studied the deed more carefully. The holding company was named Catherine's Legacy Trust, his mother's name. Jonathan had been setting something aside for her, something he wanted kept separate from the main estate. But what was on that land? He grabbed a lamp and went down to the cellar. The children were preparing for bed, moving through their evening routines. He found Margaret supervising the younger ones. "Did my grandfather ever mention Section 12? He asked quietly. She frowned. "The northwestern boundary? No, that's rough land. No water. No good grazing." "Why?" "He transferred it to a holding company 6 months before he died. For $1. I need to see what's there." "Now? It's dark." "First light tomorrow then, but I need to know what he was hiding." In the morning, Ethan rode out with Sheriff Perkins and Marshal Thatcher. They followed the property lines to the northwestern corner, where the land rose into rocky hills covered in scrub pine and granite outcroppings. It looked exactly as worthless as everyone had assumed. They spent 2 hours searching before Thatcher's horse stumbled near a cluster of boulders. The marshal dismounted to check his horse's leg and noticed something odd about the rocks. They were not natural formations. They had been placed. Together, the 3 men moved the smaller rocks aside, revealing a narrow gap in the hillside. A cave entrance, carefully concealed. Ethan lit a lantern and led the way inside. The cave widened after 20 feet into a larger chamber, and there, carved into the rock face, was a vein of silver as thick as a man's arm. It ran horizontally across the wall, disappearing into darkness in both directions. The lantern light caught the ore and threw back brilliant reflections. "Dear God," Perkins whispered. Ethan moved along the vein, following it deeper into the cave. It continued, unbroken, for at least 100 feet that he could see. This was not a played-out mine. This was an untapped fortune. "Jonathan knew," Ethan said. "He knew this was here. That's why he transferred the land separately. That's why he hid it." "But why hide it?" Thatcher asked. "Why not mine it? This could have saved the town years ago." They found the answer deeper in the cave. A wooden sign, painted in Jonathan's careful hand, propped against the wall. "For Catherine's son. Mine this only when the need is desperate and the community is ready to share the wealth justly. Do not repeat my mistakes." Ethan stared at the sign. His grandfather had found this vein late in life, after the main silver deposits had played out. But instead of exploiting it himself, instead of starting another boom and bust cycle, he had hidden it. He had set it aside for his grandson, for Catherine's son, with a warning about greed and justice. "This changes everything," Perkins said. "No," Ethan said firmly. "This doesn't change anything. We keep this secret." "Are you insane?" Thatcher demanded. "Do you know what this is worth? Hundreds of thousands of dollars, maybe millions. You could pay off Brennan's gang 10 times over. You could rebuild Silver Creek. I could start another silver boom," Ethan interrupted. "I could bring in mining companies and fortune hunters. I could turn Silver Creek into a boomtown again, full of desperate men fighting over scraps. And in 5 years, when this vein runs dry like all the others, we'd be right back where we started. My grandfather was right. This is for when we're ready to share it justly, not when we're desperate." "So what do we do?" Perkins asked. "Brennan's gang isn't going to disappear, and we still need to protect the children." Ethan thought hard. Then an idea began to form, dangerous and desperate, but possible. "We use the silver," he said, "but not by mining it. We use it as leverage. Brennan wants to know what we're hiding. We show him this cave, this vein. We tell him it's our secret, that we found it recently, and we're planning to mine it. We offer him a partnership, a real one, not protection money. He invests in the mining operation, provides security, gets a cut of the profits." "You want to bring Brennan in as a partner?" Thatcher said incredulously. "I want to keep him busy," Ethan corrected. "We set up a mining operation on this site. Small scale, just enough to be credible. We extract enough silver to show real returns. We keep him invested, keep him believing there's a bigger fortune coming. And while he's focused on the mine, he's not looking at the ranch. He's not searching for the real secret." "But we'd have to actually mine it," Perkins said. "We'd have to give him silver." "A little," Ethan agreed. "Just enough to keep the deception alive. We control the operation. We control how much comes out and how fast. And we use the time we buy to strengthen the freight business, rebuild the town's economy, get the children back home safely. Then," he paused, "then we can decide what to do with the rest of it. When we're ready, when we can do it right." Thatcher studied him for a long moment. "You're either brilliant or insane." "Maybe both," Ethan admitted. "But do you have a better idea?" The marshal looked at the silver vein, at the fortune sitting untouched in the darkness. Then he looked at Ethan and nodded slowly. "All right, we'll try it your way. But if this goes wrong, if Brennan figures out we're playing him, he'll kill us all." "Then we don't let him figure it out," Ethan said. They sealed the cave entrance carefully, making it look undisturbed. On the ride back to the ranch, they refined the plan. They would need mining equipment just enough to be convincing. They would need to bring in a few trusted men to work the mine. They would need to produce silver at a rate that seemed realistic, but was actually carefully controlled. And they would need to keep the location of the cave secret from everyone else in town. Only the council could know. The fewer people who knew where the real treasure was, the safer everyone would be. That night, Ethan stood in his grandfather's study and looked at the unsent letter to his mother. Jonathan had written about trying to do something right at the end, about hoping his grandchild would understand. Ethan understood now. His grandfather had not hidden the silver out of greed. He had hidden it out of wisdom. Silver had built Silver Creek, and silver had nearly destroyed it. The town did not need another boom. It needed steady income, sustainable growth, and the character to share wealth justly. The silver was insurance, a backup plan for true desperation, but it was not salvation. Salvation would come from the freight business, from hard work, from people choosing community over individual gain. And if Ethan could use his grandfather's insurance policy to buy time for all of that to happen, to protect 50 children while their parents rebuilt a future, then that would be the right use of the fortune. He just had to pray that Cole Brennan would take the bait. Setting up the deception required perfect timing and nerves of steel. Ethan spent 2 days acquiring mining equipment enough to look legitimate, but not so much that it drew excessive attention. Picks, shovels, ore carts, timber for shoring up the cave entrance. He purchased it all from different suppliers in different towns, paying cash and offering no explanations. Marshal Thatcher used his connections to hire 3 experienced miners from outside the territory, men who knew their craft but had no ties to Silver Creek and no loyalty to Cole Brennan. They would work the silver vein, extract just enough ore to make the operation look real, and keep their mouths shut for generous wages. The town council met in secret to discuss who else needed to know about the plan. The debate was heated. "The parents have a right to know," Claire insisted. "These are their children we're protecting. The more people who know, the greater the chance someone slips," Robert countered. "A casual word in the wrong place, and Brennan realizes we're running a con." "We're not conning him," Margaret said quietly. "We're giving him exactly what he wants, a stake in a silver mine. We're just controlling how much silver he sees and when." "It's still a deception," Claire said, "and if he finds out, people will die." They compromised. The parents would be told that new security measures were being implemented to protect the ranch, but not the details. Only the council members and the 3 hired miners would know about the silver vein and the strategy for managing Brennan. Ethan spent his nights reviewing every detail of the plan, looking for weaknesses. The cave was concealed well, but a determined search would find it. The mining equipment was necessary but obvious. The hired miners were professionals, but loyalty was always a gamble. And Brennan himself was an unknown variable, smart enough to survive as a gang leader, dangerous enough to eliminate threats, but was he greedy enough to believe in a lucky strike? On the 3rd day, Ethan sent word to Brennan through a merchant who operated in the grey areas between legitimate business and criminal enterprise. The message was simple: "We're willing to discuss your protection offer. Meet at the ranch tomorrow at noon." Brennan arrived with 10 men, enough to intimidate, but not enough to look like an attack force. They rode up to the main house with weapons visible but not drawn. Ethan, Marshal Thatcher, and Sheriff Perkins met them on the porch. The council members were present, but stayed back, letting Ethan handle the negotiation. Brennan dismounted slowly, his scarred face showing calculated confidence. "Glad you came to your senses," he said. "Protection fees are reasonable. 10% of your gross revenues, payable monthly." "We're not paying protection fees," Ethan said. "We're offering a partnership." Brennan's expression shifted to skepticism. "What kind of partnership?" "The kind where you make real money instead of skimming pennies from a freight operation." Ethan gestured for Brennan to follow him. The gang leader hesitated, then nodded to 2 of his men to come with him. They walked around the house to where horses were waiting, saddled and ready. "Where are we going?" Brennan asked. "To see what we're really protecting," Ethan said. They rode to Section 12. Ethan led them directly to the cave entrance, now partially cleared, with mining equipment stacked nearby. He had deliberately left tools scattered and ore samples visible, making it look like work in progress that they had tried to hide. Inside the cave, lantern light caught the silver vein and made it glow. Brennan stood motionless, staring at the fortune embedded in the rock. His men swore softly in amazement. "We found this 3 weeks ago," Ethan said, lying smoothly. "We've been trying to keep it quiet while we set up a mining operation." That's why we started the freight business, to create legitimate revenue to cover for the real money coming from here. Brennan walked along the vein, touching the silver with his fingers. Why, tell me, why not just mine it yourselves? Because word is going to get out eventually. Silver draws attention. We need security, real security to protect this site, and we need investors to scale up the operation. You have men, you have resources, and you have connections to move silver without attracting federal attention. We can pay you protection money and watch you bleed us dry, or we can bring you in as a partner and we both profit. It was a perfect pitch because it appealed to Brennan's greed and his ego. He was not being bought off. He was being offered a seat at the table. What percentage? Brennan asked. 20%, Ethan said. In exchange for security on the site, help moving ore to market and keeping other gangs from raiding the operation. We run the mine. You provide protection and distribution. Brennan thought for a long moment. Then he turned to face Ethan fully. I want to see production first. I want proof this vein is as rich as it looks. You produce $500 in silver in the next 2 weeks, and I'll agree to the terms. Deal, Ethan said, extending his hand. They shook. Brennan's grip was strong, testing. When he released, he smiled his cold smile. But if I find out you're trying to cheat me, if this vein is smaller than you're claiming, or if you're hiding anything else, the deal is off, and you'll wish you had just paid the protection money. Understood, Ethan said, meeting his eyes without flinching. After Brennan left, Marshal Thatcher leaned against the cave wall and exhaled slowly. That was either the bravest thing I've ever seen or the stupidest. Let's hope it's both, Ethan said. Now we need to produce $500 in silver in 2 weeks. Can your miners do it? They can do it, Thatcher confirmed. But every ounce we pull out is an ounce we can't use later. You're spending your grandfather's insurance policy to protect a secret. You realize that? I realize it. Over the next 2 weeks, the hired miners worked the vein carefully. They extracted silver ore at a controlled rate, making it look like they were working hard but hitting normal difficulties. They shored up the cave entrance, installed proper lighting, created the appearance of a professional operation. Ethan visited daily, watching the ore accumulate. Each chunk of silver represented security for the children, time for the town to rebuild, hope for a future. But it also represented the slow depletion of the reserve his grandfather had so carefully preserved. The freight business continued operating. Wagons rolled out every few days, carrying consolidated shipments from ranches to the railroad junction. The income was modest but steady. Drivers reported no trouble on the roads. Brennan's men were already providing protection, whether the official partnership was finalized or not. In the cellar, the children continued their lessons, unaware of the dangerous game being played above them. Sarah kept them focused on education. Margaret maintained the routines that gave them structure and security. And every Sunday, parents visited before dawn and after dusk, spending precious hours with their children, knowing that each week might be the last before something went wrong. Ethan found himself drawn to the cellar in the evenings, watching the children at their studies. One night, the auburn-haired girl who had first spoken to him approached with a book. "Mr. Croft, would you help me with this?" she asked. It was a volume on geography, with maps of territories she had never seen. They sat together at one of the desks, and Ethan pointed out places he had been: Wyoming, Montana, Nevada. He told her about mountains and rivers, about towns that boomed and towns that died. She listened with absolute attention, asking questions that showed she was thinking about more than just geography. She was thinking about what happened to people when their homes disappeared. "Will Silver Creek disappear?" she asked finally. Ethan chose his words carefully. "Not if we can help it. Your parents are working very hard to make sure this town survives, and so am I." "Because of the children?" "Because of the community," Ethan corrected. "Children are part of it, but so are the parents, the teachers, the people who choose to stay when they could leave. That's what makes a place worth saving." She thought about this, then nodded solemnly. "My father says you're a Harrington, like the man who built this house." That's right. Are you going to stay, or will you leave when the trouble is over? It was a question Ethan had been avoiding. He had come to Silver Creek looking for answers about his past. He had found a community fighting for its future. And somewhere in the past 2 months, their fight had become his fight. But was it permanent? Would he stay after the crisis passed? I don't know yet, he admitted, but I'm here now. And I'm going to see this through. The girl smiled. That's enough then. On the 14th day, the miners had extracted enough ore to produce $520 in silver. They refined it carefully, casting it into small ingots that would be easy to transport and sell. Ethan inspected the silver, running his fingers over the cool metal, feeling the weight of his gamble. Cole Brennan arrived at sunset with his full gang, 20 men this time. They rode hard, raising dust, making their presence known. Ethan met them at the cave entrance with the silver displayed on a table, reflecting the last light of day. Brennan dismounted and walked to the table. He picked up each ingot, checking the weight and purity with practiced eyes. $520 in silver, produced in 2 weeks. It was exactly the proof he had demanded. All right, Brennan said finally. You've got yourself a partner. 20%, as agreed. I'll provide security on this site and protection for your freight wagons. You run the mine and handle the refining. We split profits monthly. They shook hands again. This time, Brennan's grip was less testing, more sealing of a contract. One more thing, Brennan said. Whatever else you're hiding on this property, I don't care. I've heard the stories about curses and disappearances. I don't believe in ghosts, but I believe in respecting boundaries. I'm interested in silver and freight. That's all. What happens in that house is your business. It was as close to a guarantee as they were going to get. Brennan would not search the ranch. He would not investigate the cellar. He was content with his stake in the mine. As the gang rode away, Sheriff Perkins emerged from the house. Did he buy it? He bought it, Ethan confirmed. Now we just have to keep him buying it long enough for everything else to fall into place. And how long is that? Ethan looked at the setting sun, at the town in the valley below, at the ranch that had become both refuge and trap, until the freight business is profitable enough that we don't need the silver, until the town can support its children without hiding them, until we've rebuilt enough that we can survive without secrets. That could take years. I know, Ethan said, but we've bought ourselves time. Now we have to use it wisely. In the cellar that night, 50 children slept safely, unaware that their protection now depended on a controlled deception, a hidden fortune, and the fragile partnership between honest people and a gang leader who valued profit over principle. It was not the salvation anyone had hoped for. For 6 weeks, the arrangement held. The mine produced silver at a carefully controlled rate. Brennan's gang provided security. The freight business grew, adding new contracts and expanding routes. Money flowed into Silver Creek for the first time in years. Families began to eat better. The mercantile restocked its shelves. Hope, cautious and tentative, returned to the town. In the cellar, plans began for bringing the children home. Margaret and Sarah worked out a schedule, a few children at a time, reintegrated into town life as families supposedly brought them back from the fictional boarding school in Denver. It would take months to complete the transition safely, but the process was beginning. Ethan allowed himself to believe, carefully, that they might actually succeed. Then a stranger rode into Silver Creek, asking questions about missing children. His name was William Preston, and he carried credentials identifying him as an investigator for the Territorial Children's Welfare Bureau. He was in his 40s, well-dressed, with the precise manner of a bureaucrat who took his authority seriously. He checked into the boarding house and immediately began interviewing townspeople. Claire Dennison sent word to the ranch within an hour. Ethan rode into town with his heart pounding, trying to think through scenarios and responses. They had prepared for bandits, for gangs, for business competitors. They had not prepared for a government investigator. He found Preston in the boarding house parlor, reviewing notes and sipping coffee. The man looked up as Ethan entered, his expression neutral. "Mr. Croft, I presume," Preston said. "I've heard your name several times today. The town seems to think you can answer my questions." "What questions would those be?" Ethan asked, keeping his voice level. Preston pulled out a folder and opened it. "I've been conducting a routine survey of school-aged children in the territory. Census data suggests Silver Creek should have approximately 60 children between the ages of 5 and 14. Yet when I ask where these children are, I'm told they've been sent to boarding school in Denver. All 60 of them. That's unusual, Mr. Croft. Unusual enough to warrant investigation. Families make their own decisions about education," Ethan said carefully. "Indeed they do. So I sent a telegram to the 3 largest boarding schools in Denver. None of them have any enrollment records from Silver Creek." Preston closed the folder and looked at Ethan directly. "So where are the children, Mr. Croft?" The moment balanced on a knife's edge. Ethan could lie, but Preston would investigate further. He could tell the truth, but federal attention would bring exactly the exposure they had been fighting to avoid. He could refuse to answer, but that would only increase suspicion. He chose a version of the truth. "The children are safe, healthy, and being educated. I can show you, if you're willing to keep what you see confidential until you've completed your investigation." Preston's eyebrows rose. "That's a peculiar request. This is a peculiar situation. Show me now, or I'll return with a marshal and a warrant. Your choice." Ethan sent word to the ranch to prepare. Then he rode out with Preston, Sheriff Perkins, and Margaret. The investigator was silent during the ride, observing everything with sharp attention. At the ranch, Ethan led him directly to the cellar. Preston descended the stairs and stopped at the bottom, staring at 50 children engaged in afternoon lessons. His expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something close to wonder. Sarah Kemper approached with the same protective confidence she had shown Marshal Thatcher. "Welcome, Mr. Preston. I'm the primary instructor. Would you like to observe the children's progress?" Preston spent 3 hours in the cellar. He watched lessons. He examined the dormitory, the kitchen, the library. He reviewed Sarah's teaching records and student progress reports. He spoke with several children individually, asking them about their daily routines, their health, their families. The children answered honestly, without fear, because they had nothing to hide. Finally, Preston sat with Ethan, Margaret, and Sheriff Perkins in the ranch parlor. He looked exhausted, as if what he had seen had fundamentally challenged his understanding of how communities worked. "I need to understand the full situation," he said. "Why are these children living in a cellar instead of with their families?" They told him everything. The silver crash, the town's economic collapse, the pooled resources, Jonathan Harrington's trust, the decision to consolidate the children to ensure their survival while parents worked to rebuild the economy, the curse stories to protect them from predators, the careful logistics of Sunday visits, the plan to gradually reintegrate them as the town stabilized. Preston listened without interruption. When they finished, he was quiet for a long time. "What you've done," he said finally, "is either brilliant or criminally negligent. I haven't decided which yet." "The children are thriving," Margaret said firmly. "Look at their education records. Look at their health. They're better off here than they would be in a starving town." "Perhaps," Preston acknowledged. "But you've lied to territorial authorities. You've created an elaborate deception, and you've kept these children separated from their families for nearly 2 years. That raises serious questions about—" He was interrupted by the sound of horses approaching fast. Ethan went to the window and felt his stomach drop. Cole Brennan and his entire gang were riding hard toward the house, weapons drawn. The deception had been discovered. Brennan dismounted before his horse had fully stopped, his face twisted with rage. His men fanned out, surrounding the house. Ethan stepped onto the porch, positioning himself between the gang leader and the door. "You lied to me," Brennan snarled. "You made me a partner in a silver mine while hiding the real fortune." "What are you talking about?" Ethan asked, genuinely confused. One of my men was scouting your freight routes, stopped in a town 60 miles north, heard an interesting story about Silver Creek's missing children, 50 of them, supposedly at boarding school. So I asked myself, what kind of town sends every child away? Brennan's hand rested on his pistol. Then I started thinking about your perfect little mine, about how convenient it was that you found it right when you needed leverage, about how you've been controlling every ounce that comes out. You're not running a mining operation, Croft. You're running a shell game. Preston stepped onto the porch, his bureaucrat's authority suddenly cutting through the tension. Who are you, and what business do you have threatening these people? Brennan looked at him with contempt. Who the hell are you? William Preston, Territorial Children's Welfare Bureau. I'm conducting an official investigation. Whatever grievance you have can wait until... Children's welfare? Brennan's laugh was bitter. That's rich. You want to investigate child welfare? Look in the cellar. Look at what they've been hiding while pretending to be honest partners. Preston looked at Ethan. Is there something else you haven't told me? Before Ethan could answer, Margaret stepped forward. She had been standing in the doorway, but now she moved past Ethan to face Brennan directly. This woman who had spent 2 years protecting children with lies and logistics now chose absolute honesty. Yes, she said. There are 50 children in the cellar. We've been hiding them for 2 years while Silver Creek rebuilt its economy. That's what we're protecting, not a fortune in silver. Children, our children. Brennan's expression shifted from rage to confusion. Children? Would you like to see? Margaret asked. Would you like to understand what we've really been fighting for? She turned and walked back into the house, down the cellar stairs. Brennan followed, his hand still on his weapon. Ethan and Preston came behind. The gang members crowded into the doorway, uncertain. In the cellar, afternoon lessons had just concluded. The children were cleaning up their study areas, chattering quietly. They looked up as the armed men descended the stairs and fell silent, assessing the threat with the careful awareness of those who had learned to read adult moods. Sarah Kemper stepped forward, placing herself between the children and Brennan. You're frightening them, she said firmly. If you have business here, conduct it upstairs. The children are under my protection. Brennan holstered his pistol. He walked slowly through the cellar, looking at the dormitory, the schoolroom, the kitchen. He saw the books, the carefully organized supplies, the evidence of routine and structure. He saw children who were healthy, educated, safe, not riches, not treasure, just children. One of his men, a younger gunfighter named Jack, spoke up. Boss, I recognize some of these kids. That one there, he pointed to a boy of about 12. That's Thomas Wade's son. Thomas works for my brother up in Red Bluff. Sends money back every month. I thought... He stopped. I thought the kid was in Denver. They're all supposed to be in Denver, another gang member said. That's what people say. The town sent them to boarding school. The town sent them here, Margaret said. Underground, hidden, because we were starving and desperate, and this was the only way to keep them fed and safe while we tried to save our community. Brennan looked at Ethan. The mine, the partnership, that was all to keep me from looking too close. That was to buy time, Ethan corrected. The silver is real. The mine is real. But yes, we gave you what you wanted so you wouldn't search for what we were actually protecting. And if I had found this, what did you think I'd do? We didn't know, Ethan admitted. We hoped that you valued profit more than cruelty, that you'd rather have a working partnership than destroy something that couldn't benefit you. We gambled on your self-interest. Preston had been standing silent, absorbing everything. Now he spoke. Mr. Brennan, I assume you're the security provider Mr. Croft mentioned. Are you aware that threatening children is a federal offense? I'm not threatening children, Brennan said. I'm just... He stopped, seeming to realize the position he was in. An armed gang, surrounding a house full of children, led by a man angry about being deceived. How did this look to a federal investigator? The auburn-haired girl who had helped Emma make the drawing approached Brennan. She held out a piece of paper, a list written in careful handwriting. "This is our supply inventory," she said. "We track everything we use. Food, lamp oil, paper, medicine. We're very efficient. Miss Margaret says efficiency is how communities survive hard times." Brennan took the paper, looked at it without understanding. "Why are you showing me this?" "Because you're upset that Mr. Croft didn't tell you everything. But we don't tell everyone everything. We tell people what they need to know when they need to know it. That's also efficiency." She paused. "Are you going to hurt us?" The direct question, asked without fear, cut through all the adult complications. Brennan looked at this child, who understood resource management and strategic information control, and something in his face changed. "No," he said quietly, "I'm not going to hurt you." "Then will you keep our secret, like Mr. Croft and Marshall Thatcher and all the grown-ups who help us?" Brennan looked around the cellar one more time, at the children watching him with serious eyes, at the teachers protecting their students, at the evidence of a community that had chosen to sacrifice everything to save its next generation. "Yeah," he said, "I'll keep your secret." William Preston's official report to the Territorial Children's Welfare Bureau called the Silver Creek situation an unprecedented example of community cooperation under extreme economic duress. He recommended no prosecution, no federal intervention, and no disruption of the existing arrangement. He did, however, require monthly reports on the children's welfare and a firm timeline for their reintegration into family homes. The report also noted, in carefully neutral language, that the town's economic recovery was proceeding through legitimate freight operations and a small-scale mining venture. He made no mention of Cole Brennan or the nature of the partnership. Some truths were better left unspoken. Over the following months, the children began coming home, not all at once that would have raised too many questions, but gradually, in small groups. Families welcomed them back with quiet celebrations, and neighbors asked no uncomfortable questions. The fiction of Denver boarding school was maintained for the record, even as everyone in Silver Creek knew the truth. The freight business continued to grow. Ethan hired more drivers, added wagons, expanded routes. The income was modest but reliable, exactly the kind of sustainable operation Jonathan Harrington had hoped his grandson would build. The mine produced silver at a controlled rate, just enough to keep Brennan invested and satisfied. Most of the vein remained untouched, insurance for a future crisis that would hopefully never come. Brennan's gang provided security as promised, but something had changed in the partnership. His men no longer treated the ranch as a strategic asset to be exploited. They treated it with the same careful respect they would show a church or a school. Several of Brennan's younger men began courting women from Silver Creek, forming connections that transformed enemies into neighbors. One afternoon in spring, Ethan sat on the ranch porch with Marshall Thatcher and Sheriff Perkins, watching children play in the courtyard. Not hidden children living in secret, but ordinary children of Silver Creek, visiting the ranch for a picnic that Sarah and Margaret had organized. Their laughter carried on the warm air, free and unafraid. "Your grandfather would be proud," Thatcher said. "You took his insurance policy and used it to buy time for the community to heal. That takes wisdom." "Or desperation," Ethan replied. "Sometimes they're the same thing." Sheriff Perkins leaned back in his chair, looking more relaxed than Ethan had ever seen him. "The town council met last night. Voted unanimously to offer you a permanent position as ranch manager, salary, authority over operations, the works. They want you to stay." Ethan had been expecting this conversation. The question the auburn-haired girl had asked months ago, would he stay or leave, had been hanging over everything. "I'm not sure I'm qualified to manage a ranch long-term," he said. "You managed to save a town," Perkins countered. "I think you can handle some cattle and property maintenance." Margaret appeared in the doorway, as if summoned by the conversation. She sat on the porch rail, looking out at the children. "We're having a dedication ceremony next month," she said, officially naming the ranch as Silver Creek's community center, a place for education, gatherings, emergencies. Your grandfather intended it to serve the community. We want to honor that intention formally. "What would you call it?" Ethan asked. "The Harrington Community Center," Margaret said. "After Jonathan and after Catherine, your mother deserves to be remembered too. She survived what this town did to her, raised a son who came back and saved the place that cast her out. That's a legacy worth preserving." Ethan felt something tighten in his chest. For months, he had been focused on logistics and survival, on protecting children and managing crises. He had not allowed himself to think about what all of this meant personally, about the fact that he had found a family of sorts in this community, had found purpose in their struggle, had found a home in the last place he expected. "I'll stay," he said quietly, "on one condition. The children's education continues, not just during crises, but permanently. We turn this ranch into a real school. We hire more teachers. We give these kids opportunities their parents never had. That's how we honor both my grandparents." "Deal," Margaret said, extending her hand. They shook on it, sealing a commitment that would outlast any of them. That evening, as the families gathered their children to return to town, Ethan walked through the empty cellar one last time. The dormitory had been dismantled. The makeshift classroom was being converted back to storage. But the library remained, and the kitchen, and the evidence of what had been built here out of desperation and determination. He found his mother's diary in the study upstairs and sat with it by lamplight. He turned to the last page, where Catherine had written about deserving to know where he came from. Now he knew. He came from a place that had made terrible mistakes and tried to atone. From a grandfather who cast out his daughter but spent his last years trying to build something that would protect the next generation. From a mother who survived exile and poverty with grace and never lost her belief that people deserved dignity. He came from Silver Creek, from miners and teachers and desperate parents who chose to save their children at any cost. From a community that could look at its failures and choose to do better. On an empty page at the back of the diary, Ethan wrote his own entry, something for whoever might read this in future years. "I found the ranch. I found the children. I found a way to save both. The silver is still there, mostly untouched, waiting for a generation wise enough to use it justly. The town is healing. The community endures. Mother, you asked if I deserve to know where I came from. I do. And now I know where I'm going. I'm staying. This is home." He closed the diary and placed it on the shelf beside his grandfather's unsent letter. 2 generations of Harringtons, both trying to do right by the people they had hurt or abandoned. Maybe that was what family legacy really meant, not wealth or property, but the choice to stay and repair what had been broken, to build something better for those who would come after. Outside, the last of the families were riding away, their children waving goodbye to the ranch that had kept them safe. Tomorrow, those children would wake in their own beds, eat breakfast with their parents, walk freely through Silver Creek's streets. The secret was ending. The healing was beginning. And Ethan Croft, grandson of Jonathan Harrington, son of Catherine, drifter no more, stood on the porch of his inheritance and watched the sun set over a town that had learned the hardest lesson of all, that sometimes the most dangerous secrets were the ones that protected the things worth saving. The curse stories would fade into legend, the freight business would grow. The children would become adults and tell their own children about the years they lived underground while their parents fought to save their future. But what would endure, what would matter, was that when Silver Creek faced its darkest hour, the community chose to protect its children above all else. That choice, more than silver or property or wealth, was the real inheritance Jonathan Harrington had left behind, and Ethan would spend the rest of his life honoring it.